You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories about God speaking and his people having just enough faith to believe him and obey. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is episode 2. Well, hey friends, and welcome to another episode of Feathers. I am so excited for you guys to hear today's guest. It is Kathy Schwanke. Kathy is firstborn of a dozen children. She has been married to her high school sweetheart for 31 years. They make their home in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin. They have 2 married children and 4 grandsons. Kathy is women's ministry director in her church where she serves Jesus with a team of 8 women. She is passionate about leading women to experience the healing that comes from the love of God and how the truth of his word sets us free and empowers us to live a full and fruitful life. She blogs at kathyschwanke.com. And I have met Kathy, and I just love her spirit. It is so sweet. You can tell that she just loves the Lord and she loves his word. She speaks with just such wisdom, and I cannot wait for you to hear her story. Her story actually begins back in 2008 after the economic crisis, where her husband and her came out of that with a lot of debt and no jobs between the two of them. And a lot of people would have a very woe is me attitude about it, but the two of them prayed and stayed faithful to the Lord in all of his direction. And it's just so beautiful to see how God provided for them and moved in the lives of them and even in the people around them. So I can't wait for you to hear this, and I hope you enjoy. Well, hey, Kathy, and welcome to Feathers.
Hi, Amy. Glad to be here. Excited for you in this new venture.
Thank you. I am too. I'm really glad to have you on today. So I've told everybody a little bit about you, but could you introduce your family to us?
Yeah, we have a daughter who is 25 and married since 2010 and has 3 boys already. So we're grandparents. And then our son got married in 2013 and he has a son also. So we're grandparents to 4 little boys, 2 of them in the last year. My husband is, he was in construction for many, many years, and now he's a farmer, which was kind of a surprise. He's working for a large farm in our area. We live in western Wisconsin near the Twin Cities, so we're just about 10 minutes from the river that divides Minnesota and Wisconsin.
So you're in cold country.
Very cold. It's 0 right now.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, and there's something I've been wanting to ask you, so I follow you on Instagram, and I've seen you talk about driving on your frozen lakes. So that is just so unheard of down here in the Carolinas. Like, how do you even know that it's safe to do that?
Well, they have a certain measurement. If there's been so many days of below 0 weather or weather under freezing, I should say, then the ice thickens and they can measure it. And of course, there are cars busting through every year because the fishermen are diehards out here and they want to get out early. And so, yeah, you have to be careful and depends on how quick the water flows and that kind of thing. So, yeah, ice is a winter sport up here in many ways, snowmobiling, and they open up the ice and they do water ski with snowmobiles and polar plunge, jump in your bikini to raise money for different things, Special Olympics and stuff like that. So ice fishing and when I was dating my husband, we were still in high school, and one of my favorite things to do was go out on the lake with him, and he would pull up the brake and we'd spin in circles on the ice. So he's kind of a daredevil dude.
Wow. I don't know. Okay, so that's interesting. So it's the number of days. So I had no clue. I didn't know if you could throw a rock somewhere.
I don't count the days. No, they drill. They drill into the hole they drill holes in the ice for fishing, and so they would test and measure, and it's on the news. The ice is this thick on this lake.
Oh, so, nice. So it's something that you watch.
Yeah, watch for it, and you'll see people out on the ice when it seems way too early because they have their little fish houses out there and they have heaters in them. Crazy.
Wow, it's like a totally different world. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to that needs to be something I come see.
Yeah, when I see flowers blooming this time of year, it's like, what? This is the same country?
Right. Yeah, we have daffodils coming out now or something. I don't know. We have something. So, Kathy, let's go ahead and jump into your story because I know you have a wonderful story to share, and it has to do with God leading you in one direction and then having to just like activate your faith and just trust that that's really the direction that he was leading because it was hard and it was a long time. So could you just jump into that story and just take us back to how that started?
Yeah, well, the story that I want to tell is very complicated and has a huge backstory, but to try to make it as concise as possible, we were on a hobby farm, and I had a gift shop on the farm. In 2009, the summer, my husband, because of the economic change, and he was in construction, went and lived away from home for work because the Twin Cities work slowed down. And so since we had a hobby farm and I was home alone, we decided we should put it on the market because it was a lot of work to take care of even just the yard. Plus I had my business. And so
I'm sorry, what's a hobby farm? Like what all does that include?
A hobby farm. Yeah, I'm just assuming everyone knows all these things. A hobby farm is we had 20 acres and my husband had a dream as a child of farming. He just loved being with his grandpa on the farm. And so that was kind of his way of fulfilling that dream, is to buy a hobby farm. So we had some steers that he raised, and the kids raised chickens and did 4-H and showed them at the fair. And we had a goat and some turkeys at one point and a few pigs. So then they would bale the hay, and so they had that experience of farm life. And I grew up on a dairy farm, so I didn't want anything to do with farming. I didn't know he had this dream. And so we sort of had this imaginary line in the yard where he took care of everything down below, which was all the acreage and the barn and stuff, and the kids had that. And then I had my gift shop and my pretty flowers, and he honored that, you know, with me not wanting to have a lot to do with it. Of course, if he was in a bind and needed hay stacked in the barn, then I would help because I enjoyed it as a kid. But for the most part, him and the kids did the farming part. So we put it on the market. It was on the market 4 long years because we are an hour outside of the metro area, and only crazy people like my husband would commute to work that long. And so we knew the market would be difficult with the economic slowdown and with our location. And so it was a long 4 years of waiting for the Lord to sell the house, but just trusting that he had a plan. In the meantime, my husband, the commercial construction industry, not only was he traveling for it, he was just really a stressful position to have. And so he really wanted to get out. So he thought that he wanted to be a camp maintenance director at a Christian camp. So he had been applying to camps for like the whole time that we had the house on the market. And I was not sure I wanted to leave home and family, but open to the Lord calling us there. But as time went on, it served him as kind of hope to get out of his job. But my feet were digging in a little bit more, wanting to stay open to the Lord. But at the same time, we're having grandbabies, and I didn't want to leave and, you know, be separated from them unless I absolutely knew it was God. So 2013, then we finally got an offer on our farm. And my husband had been working in Bismarck, North Dakota at the time. And we got an offer on the farm. He got 3 offers for camp positions, one in Texas, one in California, and one in Colorado. And when that happened, you know, after all these long years, it's like, oh my goodness, Lord, you're really doing this now? You know, the timing was so strange. But in my husband's time away from home, the Lord drew him near. So he always had a relationship with the Lord, but it wasn't as close as it was when on the road. And so he was really beginning to acknowledge God in all his ways and letting him direct his course. And so I think it was a test because he turned all 3 of those positions down that summer. And it was a crazy, wild summer. Our son got married that summer. We moved off the farm, 12 years of stuff packing and, you know, him living in Bismarck. So it was a really crazy summer. So the closing was Labor Day weekend, and because we did not have our mortgage anymore, my husband quit his job like the next week because it was so stressful. And a friend of his who works for a local farmer said, come work for us. And so, and he also knew that they would hire him back in an instant if he left the construction industry. And he had another company that was wanting him to work because they got the new Viking Stadium that's being built in the Twin Cities right now. And so they were needing employees locally again. So we knew he had job security. And so he quit his job just for a break and went to work on the farm, which was kind of his dream. But we didn't think financially we'd ever be able to do that because it was significantly less money. And because I had closed my gift shop when we sold the farm, I didn't have any income coming in either. So we're both just huge transitions, emptying our nest and being uprooted from our 12 years on the farm. And he quit his career and I quit mine. And the Lord's been leading me more into ministry and speaking and writing. And he just has started cracking that door open. So I actually have a speaking engagement next weekend, and then a couple others out front. So
you guys, when you moved out, you stayed in the area?
Yeah, so what happened is we obviously had been searching the market for these few years. Every time he was home, we'd drive around and look at houses. We knew the market. Our daughter and our son-in-law had lost their home to foreclosure, so we kind of knew about the process of fighting for a house and how these mortgage companies were just pulling the rug out from under people because of the paperwork. So their difficulty in finding a place to rent played into us understanding the market also, and the cost of rent here. It used to be $350 to $400, and now it's like $1,200 a month, $800 to $1,200. So just really different market, and from 12 years ago when we had gone through the process of looking for a home. So we had a lot of experience in where things were going in the market, and because we didn't know exactly where we would land, if he would still get a camp job maybe, if he would stay at the farm, if he would go back to the Twin Cities. We didn't want to put down roots right away. So I called the woman who had purchased our former home before we moved to the farm. We sold this big brick house in town in Amory, Wisconsin, to a woman who had moved out 2 years later but still had the home, and she just let people stay there at different times. So I called her, and it was open. She was more than willing to let us come in there. So we had this place to kind of lay over. I called it our layover Lakeview because we had a lake view there. So we had this temporary place, and God had planted the idea in our house because the market had changed and we didn't get as much for the farm as we wanted. We weren't upside down on our mortgage, and we came out with enough to, get a good down payment on our next house. But we would be taking out a 30-year mortgage at this stage of life, and we didn't want to do that. So we wanted to advance our financial capabilities, and so that's why we got the idea to flip a house, because we knew that we could buy foreclosure, and this was the one thing in our lives that had always been financially advancing for us. Every time we needed money, we could find it in our real estate because of his construction and my decorating. We always improved our real estate. So we moved into this brick house in September, and he was farming all fall, so he was very busy. And then it was the winter of 2013, 2014, which was 51, the sub-zero days.
Oh my
and
gosh.
That's when we began the process of looking at these foreclosures. Well, if you go into a home and it's below zero, it feels colder inside the home that's not heated than it is outside. So it was a miserable search, and so many homes we went into were in such disarray that I would actually feel sick to my stomach when we left. And we would go back into this brick house, and it was a really hard house to heat. It's really huge, and there's no insulation. It was 1916. It was a beautiful home, beautiful wood floors, tall ceilings, leaded glass windows. And we had a wood stove in, so we were just stuffing this wood stove 3, 4, 5 times a day to keep the house warm during this crazy cold winter. And then we'd go out and look at these foreclosures, and we'd come home and be like, is this what we want to do? And eventually then we found a house that, we had certain criteria that we would live in it if it didn't sell, that it would be rentable if, in a good location for renting if it didn't sell. So we're trying to cover those bases. But one of the key things through this whole entire thing was prayer and just having the faith that God was leading us in this. And so we found this place just across the river in Minnesota. So from Amory, where we were living at the time, it was about a 25-minute trip. But in the process of looking for a home and finding that one, and we're in negotiations for that one, another one came onto our radar that was on a lake that we ultimately wanted to land on a lake. And so this farmer that my husband is working for has seen the value of who he is, because he was trained in semi-mechanics initially before he went into the construction industry. So he was working on their equipment. They have huge equipment, and they do farming, and they have a huge corn drying industry. And so he's able to help them maintain all their machinery, and he's able to go out on the tractor and do work on the farm for them. And so they saw his value, and they upped his income. And so we decided that this was from God. It was his little childhood dream come true, that he could work on a farm and close to home. It's only 15 minutes away. So they had it on their to purchase this property for us and make it part of his salary. And so we acquired 2 homes the same weekend.
Oh,
my gosh. We closed on the flip house. That's what I'm calling it. We closed on the flip house, and then we closed on this lake house that we have. And so I looked at my husband and I said, we have got to get rid of one of these 3 houses. And so let's work on getting the one we're going to live in ready first. And then we'll move on to updating the flip house. So this home that we're in right now had not been ever lived in. It was a cabin for a doctor, and he had done many updates in 2008, and then he passed away and left it to his children, and they live in the Twin Cities, and they never did anything with it, so it had been vacant. So
this is this is the property that they got for you, or that's
yes.
The flip house that you're talking about?
No, the flip house is in Minnesota, and
okay.
The property that we live in now is in Wisconsin. They're only about 10 minutes apart from me.
And that's with the farm, right? So you went from your rental to the
farm.
farmer
that I'm sorry. Sorry, this is so confusing. The farmer that my husband works for purchased this house on the lake that we're in. So it's not on the farm, it's separate from the farm.
Okay.
So,
gotcha.
Yeah, so they purchased it for us and added it into my husband's salary package. So he's working.
So you're on the lake. Okay, so you went from the rental to the lake, and you still have the flip house, though.
Yes. Yeah. So I had painting and cleaning and so many things to do in this house. So our goal was to get into this house by the end of May, because we closed on both of them the end of September. So for a month I did all this painting and just cleaning it out, a few updates, and then the moving process of, emptying boxes and all of that, just getting our main stuff moved. And then in the month of June of 2014, I had boxes and boxes and boxes stored in the basement at the brick house that I moved over here, opened them up, and then had permission to have a garage sale back at the brick house. So I was moving things back and forth like 3 trips a day by myself. And then I didn't put this in my story that I told you about, but my dad passed away in a car accident on June 9th.
Oh my goodness.
And so there was a week lull in all of this crazy moving and cleaning and we had to clean out our yard because the debris from the leaves that have fallen had built up. So there was like 6 inches of dirt around the garage. And so we were just doing crazy amounts of work on this lake home before we ever started the flip house. So Dad was, we lost Dad in June, and then my grandson was born the day after we buried my dad. I had poison ivy that month. It was hot. It was just really a painful month, and yet joys in there. So we got in this house, and the 4th of July weekend was like stellar. It was beautiful. We had our deck all washed and stained, and a path cleared down, and the dock was in, and all of our family came. And there was a moment when Dale, my husband Dale, and the kids and grandkids were down by the lake, and they were walking up, and Dale was holding the 2-year-old Parker. And I just thought, this is what I wanted. This was my dream, to have a place where our family could gather. And my husband didn't even know that's what he ultimately wanted. And it was just like the sense of God's been in this the whole time, and he just carried us through. There was so many beautiful gifts in the process of that. I just can't even begin to tell you. But to get to the flip house story, which is kind of what we wanted to highlight here. And so that process started right after the 4th of July. My husband had already been putting hours and hours and hours into rewiring in the house and replumbing some of it because we added a bathroom. So he's doing all this background work that I couldn't do anyways. And I was continuing to, do things here at the house, getting stuff unpacked and decorating and more of the fun things here. So at the end of August, we're like, we got to get this house on the market because we're starting to run out of money and we don't want to heat it in the winter, and it's beautiful. It's in Taylor's Falls, the house that we purchased, and Taylor's Falls, Minnesota. And that's a river town, and it's hills and it's maples, and there's the huge St. Croix River running through, and so it's kind of a touristy town. But to get it on the market in the fall would just be so ideal. And so we just started the push, and my part was painting, and I painted everything in that house, ceilings and walls and even floors upstairs. And we had to ditch putting a garage at the location because of the cost of the electrical and the plumbing. It was just more cost, hidden costs that we didn't really consider on the front end. So that meant that all of his table saw and his miter saw were set up in the living room and the kitchen of the house. So everything that I did, I wanted to keep it clean, but we're still tracking this stuff through. So we had to do this pretty strategically. I started upstairs and, when he was done upstairs, then he moved down. And so I was working upstairs with the paint and making him take his shoes off. And it was quite a journey.
So you guys had to get all of this set up, and were you able to get it on the market in the fall?
Yeah, so that's kind of my favorite part of the story. Like I said, it was grueling in those last, month and a half. My husband was pushing me. He's like, we got to get this on the market by the end of September. And so I push, and we weren't ready. Actually, the first deadline was mid-September, and then we pushed more, and it was end of September, and then it was middle of October. We got to get this on the market. So we were coming home at 9:30 at night and eating a salad and going to bed and starting over the next day. It was just a push. So it came time. We're almost done, just finishing things up, and of course I'm praying the whole time about staging. How much work do you put into staging a house that you're going to sell because you want it to sell right away and you want it to be cute? So where do you find a realtor? So I'm asking everyone I know who's in this area, do you know a realtor in Minnesota? Because the licensed ones, you have to be licensed per state, and the ones we knew did not have a license in Minnesota. So we had a couple leads. One of them was a former classmate of mine. I grew up in Minnesota, and I never knew Kathy, but I had heard about her, and I've seen her faces on billboards as I drive into the Twin Cities. So we called her, and then we called a couple of others, and Kathy was on vacation, and the other one was on vacation, and the third one was so weird, did not call us back. My husband talked to her secretary, and then we just never got a call. So we were pretty frustrated, and a woman who was a realtor on this side of the river heard about us, so she called us, and she offered to do a market analysis. So I have this day where I'm just going to nail a bunch of stuff at the house. I'm just excited that he's not going to be there. He's out of my way, and I can get a bunch of stuff done. And he calls me, and he said, this lady is coming to do a market analysis on our house. And I'm like, I'm not ready. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look ready. She can't come now. And he's like, I'm sorry. And so she came, and not a real good, personable, personality. Took some pictures, real matter of fact. And I think it was like the next day she emailed us the market analysis, and we looked at it, and both of our hearts just sunk into our stomach. And it came in like $20,000 less than we anticipated selling the house for, which would mean that we would get nothing for our sweat equity if we even made back what we had invested. And so the two of us kind of had a cloud over our heads for about 3 days and just discouraged. And suddenly I heard the Lord say, Kathy, this is not what I called you to. And I'm like, oh, that's right. God's been leading in this. And so I said to Dale, this is the enemy trying to discourage us. We know he put it on our hearts to do this because we had been praying. Actually, for the first time in our married life, we prayed together on a regular basis, and that wasn't a long time answer to prayer for me. But because my husband had this revival when he was living away from home, he just had a heart for that too. So we had been praying through this whole process, and we heard the Lord specifically at certain times along the way. So we went to prayer, and I called Kathy back, and she met me at the house, and we didn't know each other in school because I graduated in a class of 500, so I knew who she was, but we just never connected. So it turned out she was a believer, and we had fellowship in the kitchen. And it was just a blast to get to know her. And so I told her what we wanted, what we thought the house would go for, told her the whole story. She went, did a market analysis. It came in right at where we thought the Lord was wanting us to put this on the market. And so when we listed it, we knew that it was a first-time homeowner's home because it was a 3-bedroom when we bought it. We decided to take one of the bedrooms and make it into a 2-bath. Because it only had 1 bathroom on the main level. So it was now a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home. And she uploaded the pictures on a Saturday, and we had a showing on Monday, and Monday afternoon we had an offer. And on Wednesday we had a signed contract. So the house went that fast.
Wow, and so everything went fine and it closed.
Yeah, there's always those places of, is this for real? And because it's a first-time homeowner, it's not over till it's over. So the closing, it was mid-October we put on the market, and the closing was set for Thanksgiving week, which is another kind of cool story because my birthday is November 28th, and we had closed on the brick house that we had lived in back in 1994 on my birthday. And so when they wanted to close on my birthday, it was kind of a little kiss from the king, like, I'm in this. This happened to you back then, and now I'm in this time. And so because we had signed an offer, accepted an offer on the house, all the other showings were rejected because it had a signed offer. And so I would be sort of discouraged, like, oh no, we don't want to stop showing it because we don't know this is really going to happen. But then I would remember my birthday. And so leading up to that day, of course, there were things we had to do on the house because it was a first-time homeowners. They don't want any flaking paint, and we hadn't done anything to the outside of the house. So we had to go back, and I actually had the shop vac sucking up paint chips off the ground so that the inspector wouldn't find any paint chips. And it was fall, so it had already fallen. And so it was, there were some hard weeks in there of doing a few more things on the house when harvest had started for my husband on the farm. And so he was really busy. And but we got to that point, and yeah, it just went through without a hitch. And there's such a joy in the fact that they were going through Wells Fargo, which our realtor didn't want to use because they are the most picky when it comes to inspecting older homes. And so just besides those two little things, we had paint chips to pick up off the ground, and we had some touch-ups to do on the outside of the house. So besides those things, there were no glitches in that process either of them getting their financing. So we get to closing, and I had a feeling that the young couple they were believers also. And I had purchased a $1.99 decal, those the wall words that you can apply to your wall. They're vinyl.
Yep.
So I was at Walmart one day. I was walking by those little decals hanging there, and there's one that says believe, and there's a scripture reference to it. All things are possible for God. And so I walked by it, and I felt like God wanted me to pick that up and put it on the wall in that house. And so I did. I put it on the way up the stairway. So one day my husband and this couple ended up at the house together, so he met them. And she asked him about that Bible verse that I had put on the wall. And so we get to the day of closing, and we learned that they had been praying for a home for 2 years. They had been living with his mother, I think. So they were an answer to our prayer, but we found out we were also an answer to their prayer. So the fact that God brought all of us believers together in one room that day, we were having a praise party at closing.
And the realtor and everything.
Yeah, I don't know about the financial people, but they sure heard a lot about the Lord in that room that day because we were just celebrating about how God had pulled this all together. It's amazing on the process of how our faith was tested, knowing that God, because it's a crazy thing to do. We knew that people looking at us are like, what are you doing? You had your farm on the market for 4 years and you're going to try to flip a house. But we also knew that God likes to show off and, to make himself known through his people. And that's why I love this story, because, especially that piece of us being under a cloud for 3 days, thinking that, oh my goodness, what we started out to do isn't happening. And then having that conviction come and no, we are standing in faith here and we're not going to let the devil steal from us. And so we went to prayer, and the piece of having all of these people be believers, and, we just formed friendships with our realtor and her husband. They took us out to dinner, and, we're friends on Facebook and stuff now too. So we'll be keeping in touch with them over the years, I'm sure.
Wow. I relate to that so much just through the wait and the doubt. It's just like in our adoption story, we waited several years for it to come through, and I can just remember, just thinking, gosh, you're crazy. God didn't really say that, and it just turned into that. He just tried to steal that faith and the joy about the whole thing. Right. And just making it so discouraging and doubt filled. And I love that you go back to prayer and just believe in what God told you to do from the beginning.
Yeah. For some reason, the story of Nehemiah, he went back to build that wall, and then he had this opposition, and I just love his faith. Then they start building with a sword in one hand and a hammer in the other, so to speak, where they had to be on guard against the enemy, but they just kept doing what they knew to do. And that's all we could do in any of these things that we were setting out to do, is just keep going forward. Another kind of side story in this whole big story is when the farm wasn't selling about a year before, I was in my prayer room. I had my own little room that I went and closed the door, and it had a great big patio door that overlooked the farm. And I was in there praying one day, and I prayed this prayer out loud. And oftentimes I write my prayers, or I'm a quiet prayer, but I've been practicing prayer out loud more in the last 5 years. And it's more rich. But this one day I was praying, and I felt like the Holy Spirit just prayed this bold prayer through me, because it wasn't even on my heart to pray this, but I prayed for the buyers of our farm, that they would be blessed and that they would be a blessing to the community, and that they would use that property for the Lord and for his glory. And so the buyers of our farm are a young couple, and we developed a relationship with them. We've had them over, and she actually bought a lot of my merchandise that I was closing out of on my business. And so I have this little building that was a gift shop on the farm that God just blessed me so much in that experience. But she wanted to do that ultimately. And so she bought my cash register and things like that. But the last Christmas, they invited us over after Christmas, I guess, to the farm. We had dinner with them, and she goes, you know what I'm using your little building for? And I said, what? And she goes, Bible study.
Oh, that's so awesome.
So I was just rejoicing, because the Lord provided a place for me to close out my merchandise, because I had a gift shop full. It's a 2-car garage size, so it wasn't real big, but it was full of merchandise. And so I ended up finding a gal who was renting out booths, and it was kind of the Restore and Restyle. That's actually the name of her shop, Restore and Restyle. So I was able to rent a booth and close out my merchandise over a period of time. And so that's where Erin, that bought our farm, ended up opening a little shop. She took my booth over basically and bought my remaining merchandise. And so then she could get her feet wet in the retail industry without having it at her home and having to oversee it, because she worked full time also. So anyway, she started doing The Best Yes by Lisa Turkhurst with her Bible study girls in that little building, and had just had baby number 2, and the Lord put it on her heart to stop doing the gift industry for now, because she has this young family and this job. And so that was kind of cool too, that he had spoken to her through that, and she was willing to put that dream on hold for her family for now. And I know they still have big plans for the farm, but Yeah, it's just so awesome.
Yeah, so he was just in all parts of this. And I do,
Yeah.
I love that it's just like a fruit of your prayers too, you know?
Yeah, the Lord says, ask and you will receive and your joy will be complete. And so often we fail to ask. And he says, acknowledge me in all my ways. If you acknowledge me in all your ways, I will direct your steps. And we know that verse. You know, the first part everyone knows. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your steps. And so we know it, but do we acknowledge him in all of our ways? I can't say that's true of us. We haven't. We've made a lot of decisions without praying. But now that we're praying together, we're just seeing such amazing things that we can just go to that prayer closet and he answers us. I ask him for affirmation when I'm speaking and he gives it to me. You know, a lot of times I've spoken at things and I don't hear much feedback. And so I've started to ask him for those things, and sure enough, surprise, surprise, he comes through. So
I love that. He gives us such good gifts. You've already spoken several scriptures, but did you have one in particular that you maybe that God gave you to sustain you through all of these changes and everything that was happening, or maybe that there's somebody, that's kind of in that wait time that you might give them that could help them?
Yeah. In that place of wondering if we had done the right thing with that house when the devil was trying to, steal from us. Psalm 1, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked or stand in the way of sinners or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. And when I read that, whatever he does prospers, I actually have it written in my Bible, 9/29/2014, in prayer to sell the house in Taylor's Falls fast. And I asked for it fast sale. Whatever he does prospers, because I knew that we were in the will of God. I knew that we had been planted by the waters and we delighted in his word. And so true to his word, whatever we do when we are pursuing God in a faith call, there's prosperity. And that's not the prosperity gospel. It's prospering and advancing the kingdom of God.
I've got chills up and down. I love that so much. That actually, I think I actually ran into that verse somewhere else today. So maybe it was a verse for me.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. When we can bank on that, there's so many things in scripture. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your path, and whatever he does prospers. And man, we can just cling on to those tightly and watch him work.
Oh, amen. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Kathy. I just love your story and your heart. And if people want to connect with you after this episode, where online can they find you?
Well, I have everything in my name. KathySchwanke.com is my blog, and Schwanke is a little complicated. A lot of people think it's Schwanke, but it's SCHWANKE, and Kathy with a K. So I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and which one did I miss? Pinterest.
Well, I just thank you so much for spending time with me today, Kathy.
Thanks, Amy. I'm so thankful to have the chance. I just pray that many are encouraged by my story and by all that you're doing. God bless you.
Well, guys, I don't even know what to add to that to encourage you anymore. I hope you can see why I love Kathy so much. And their story truly is about having a need and having a God who can provide for our needs. And that when he calls us to something, it may not be easy. We may have to wait for things. We may have to trudge through sub-zero temperatures to find what he's called us to. We might have to put in some sweat equity to do it. We might even be discouraged in the middle of it, wondering what in the world we were doing and wondering if God really is with us. And if we go back to God, then we can stay faithful to him and we can watch him work. And just to see how God provided for their needs, not just minimally, but just beautifully, with the other believers coming together, the buyers, and that being an answer to their prayer, even the agent, to hear them, having a praise session at the closing is just so beautiful, and how that was furthering the gospel and just giving him praise for all that he's done. So guys, I cannot wait for you to hear next week's episode. In the meantime, please check out the show notes. Leave a comment for Kathy, letting her know how much this episode meant to you guys. I know it did. I know it's so encouraging. So you can do all that at featherspodcast.com. All right, so we will see you next time on Feathers.